a lot of fulfillment. But it can be very precarious, right? In those early days, man, which is a lot of fun. So, in researching Poe Group Advisors and looking at your core values, I noticed one jumped out at me, which again, I'm encouraged by, and that is your use of the term balance. Could you unpack that for us quickly?
Yeah, I joined a program called Strategic Coach in 2009 and right in the middle of financial crisis. And prior to that, I worked weekends. I wouldn't think twice about checking email on really all weekend long. And um I even wrote a book called The Unplugged Vacation. And so Carol and I took a vacation with the kids. We went on a cruise. This was probably 2005, 2006. And I took my laptop with me, and I'll never forget, we're walking off the boat, and she said, you know, she was pretty clear, like, she's pretty candid when she wants to say something. She said, I swear to you, if you ever take this laptop on another family vacation, I'm throwing it in the water.
Oh no. I believe her, by the way.
Oh yeah, I believed her. She was telling the truth. She totally would have done it.
Uh,
So, I'm lucky because I had somebody to kind of enforce those boundaries.
mm,
And so I would credit this to Carol, is like she made me very aware of, like, if you're checking email and you're running off to go to the, you know, the office while you're on vacation, like you're missing so much. You're missing from your kids, and
yeah.
your mind is gone. Like she would notice, after I'd be working, she would notice I was thinking about it, because that's what happens. You read an email and it gets in your mind, and then you start thinking about it. And um so now I and with Strategic Coach, um because they very much are aligned with that philosophy of you should work hard and you should play hard,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
And but don't mix the two.
Yeah.
And um I also had a Canadian client who said I got a message from him that he was going to be gone. And so I called him up and I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I'll be gone for like 3 weeks. Um, I'm not going to be checking email or anything." I said, "How do you do that?" And he had a really successful CPA firm.
Mhm.
He says, "Well, you just do it. The first time you take off, you look down, you wonder if you're going to have a business when you get back." He said, but he
Yeah.
said, you'll find out what your team's made of, and you got to plan for it. You got to notify your clients that you're heading out of town, and kind of bring forward anything that might be necessary to get to before you leave. But you work like a dog before you go on vacation, and you work hard when you get back, but it's worth it. And so um I very much follow that now. And I have two phones. I have one phone at the office, and then I have a personal cell phone that I don't give out to clients. And so I keep everything really separate.
Yeah. That's good, man. I applaud you for that. It's hard, right? It's hard.
It's it's hard. It's one of those habits that's hard to make,
Mm,
but it's easy to keep.
mm, nice. That's encouraging. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really cool. We had, of course, we're both in the M&A world, right? You help folks that have CPA firms sell their practices or buy practices, right? You're in the M&A space, particularly in accounting. We're more general with our M&A work. And we had one of our clients come down, new clients come down last week from North Carolina. And he's been involved in this business for the last 40 years. It's all he's done
Wow.
for the last 40 years. And we sat in the conference room and we talked about, okay, this is our process. This is what we're going to do. And we spent a couple hours with him. And I had a couple thoughts to him. I said, number one, congratulations, you've built a hell of a business, and you're probably at the finish line of this business, and the buyer that's going to buy you is at the starting line. But you are to be congratulated, you and your wife, because of the hard work that you've put into this business for 40 years. I get it. I get the gravity. And he, at the very end of the conversation, he said, Chuck, I'm real excited to work with you guys. In this time in my life, and I've had long conversations with my wife, he said, it is both exciting and scary because he's selling his business of 40 years. And I looked at him and I said, I get it. I've been there. I've been in your shoes. I get that in a sense, you're giving your baby to somebody else. I get it. And I said to him, I called him by name, and I said, if you could add one more emotion to that sentence that you just had, that you just gave me, and that is when this is over, you're going to be tired. And he looked at me like a cow looking at the new gate, and he said, explain that. And I said, when we get into due diligence, it's going to be your second full-time job. And it's like the tractor pull where the tractor pulls a slide down the field and the weight gets heavier and heavier. In the 11th hour, you're probably going to be sick of me because we've been living together for 6 months. But then you're going to get paid. And all of this hard work and the second job of due diligence is going to pay off, and you're going to get rewarded for all this sacrifice of 40 years. Talk to us real quick, Brannon, about deal fatigue in the work that you do and just M&A in general.
Yeah, it's a very real thing. And there are so many emotions involved. And I think that is a lot of energy spent just because of the emotional, no matter who the buyer is or what your process is like going through the sale. I mean, somebody could just come along and write you a check and say, here, it's done. There's no due diligence. Even if it was as simple as that,
Right.
you would have emotional fatigue just with the struggle of, because especially someone with 40 years building a business, that's their identity, that's their day-to-day, that's their friend group, that their employees are probably very close, probably close relationships. All that changes, into that next phase. So, there's that. And then when you pile on the due diligence component, which I actually think that the legal component can be a harder aspect of it. To me, that's one of the most frustrating aspects of M&A, because as someone who's an intermediary, I see the mistakes that lawyers make, and it's just sort of aggravating. I do think that be very careful if you're going through this process. Be really careful about who you pick as a lawyer. Be careful about who you pick as a buyer. I did a podcast with a lawyer at Baker Donaldson named Chris Sloan, and his philosophy on contracts was, let's keep them short and as concise as possible, and let's be able to actually understand what they say.
Yeah.
That's a novel idea, isn't it? Be able to actually understand a contract. And when he told me his philosophy was, I was at a dinner. I met him through EO, and he's a big supporter of EO Nashville. And I said, do other lawyers want to take a shot at you because of this? Because you're talking about simplicity and short contracts and plain language. And he kind of laughed. He said, actually, it takes more work to make something concise.
Yeah.
It's like the old saying, if I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter. It's the same thing with contracts, right? And yeah, I think lawyers can bring a lot of complexity to a deal. And
Mm.
when I see deal fatigue, it's usually because a lawyer has over inserted himself or herself into the deal. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I mean, there are some complexities in these deals that have to be dealt with. They have to be dealt with good lawyers, but um, you just have to watch out for a lawyer on one side or the other letting complexity creep in a big way.
Yeah. I totally agree with that philosophy, Brandon. Um, we had I worked on a deal recently where there were two partners selling out to the other two partners, right? So four principals, and they wanted to. And I have no dog in the hunt when it comes to, I've got very good attorneys that I work with that will, draft these agreements, but I don't care. It's not part of our service offering, and this firm wanted to use their own attorney, and of course I won't mention any names, but and not to get in the weeds in our conversation, but the attorney was, I think, very qualified, except he was qualified in a different part of the law.
Mhm.
So when it came to understanding the M&A language wrapped around this deal, we really didn't hit the markers, right? So we had to kind of go back and restart. I brought in one of my guys who that's all he does is corporate law, right? In the M&A world, and we were able to wrap things up and, to your point, keep it pretty simple but comprehensive enough where there was not blowback. No partner in the deal would come back 5 years later with some type of grievance because things were buttoned up, and I think that's really important, right? Let's
Mhm.
do it. And I love the simplicity with, comprehensiveness, right? Let's wrap it up, make it tight and clean, but also understandable. And I think in the M&A world, that's the biggest, I think one of the biggest problems we have is that a lot of folks that do what we do don't have the heart of a teacher, right? They become so transactional that they lose the people part and the understanding, like with my fella in North Carolina, right? Understanding what he and his wife will go through in the next 6 months. I think we lose sight of that because we're looking at the closing docs and we're looking at the transition, we're looking at the clinking of the glasses, but there's a lot that goes into, events that happen before that event, and then there's stuff that happens after that event, right? What's he going to do next? Where's he going to park his money? How's he going to make this work as he lives out the rest of his life? Uh, let's talk for a moment, and we're sort of winding down, but talk with me. What's the biggest misconception? You're selling CPA firms, right? You're working with CPAs, which when I heard that, I thought that's really interesting because CPAs generally understand, the art of a deal. They understand numbers, of course. That's their life, their world. But what's the biggest misconception when you're selling a CPA firm, probably to another CPA firm or to another CPA? What's the misconception there?
Well, I think most most buyers and sellers think a very long transition period is necessary where the seller is working alongside the buyer.
Hmm.
And um, in most cases, if the buyer is a competent operator, that's not the case. Now, there can be cases where a seller wants to stay on, and we've had private equity firms buy out CPA firms, and they want the seller to stay on because they don't have anyone else to operate it. So they want a long transition. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a transition where you're going from a CPA who's selling the business to a competent buyer who's a CPA.
Mhm.
And usually transition can be very short, like a couple of months
Mhm.
tops, 3 months tops. Um, that's probably the biggest misconception.
Mm.
And yeah, people think they got to stay on for 2 or 3 years to get everything moved over. And it's just not, it's actually not only is it not necessary, it's actually problematic.
Yeah. Yeah, I was